Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving deep into President Trump's first major interview of his second term. This thing happened 1 year in, and it really made some waves. We're talking about everything from some really high-stakes battles at home to some pretty tense standoffs on the world stage. It really laid out a bold and, you could say, controversial vision for the country.
You know, the whole interview was this incredibly direct. And this quote right here about the Insurrection Act, it really sets the tone. And it gets to the heart of a key theme of the entire conversation, the really assertive use of presidential power. And that's something we're going to get into for sure.
So yeah, the interview happened at Mar-a-Lago, but the real backdrop was a country that was already 31 days into a government shutdown. So to really get what's going on here, we're going to break it down and look at it through 4 key areas. What's happening on the home front, a really forceful new security doctrine, that bold use of presidential power we just mentioned, and a pretty dramatic shift in foreign policy.
All right, first up, let's get into the battles happening right here at home. The most pressing thing, of course, is the government shutdown. But the interview also really brought to light some deep divisions on the economy and healthcare. So, what's really at the heart of this shutdown? Well, it boils down to a classic political stare-down. You can see it right here. Democrats say, look, we'll reopen the government, but with one big catch. You have to extend the Obamacare subsidies. The president, on the other hand, is digging in his heels for a clean extension. That means reopen the government first, and then we can talk about health care. And, well, the president did not mince words when he was asked about the Democrats' position. He called them crazed lunatics. He basically framed their stance as a kind of extortion, saying the solution is simple, just vote to reopen the government. From the shutdown, the conversation swung over to the economy, and wow, were there 2 totally different pictures being painted. On one side, you have this very real concern about rising grocery prices hitting everyday Americans. But on the other, you've got the president's point of view. A booming stock market and 401k is at all-time highs, which he says is all thanks to his tariff policies. And that forceful approach on the home front? Well, it carries right over into the president's vision for security, both here and, well, everywhere else. This part of the conversation showed a real commitment to a much more aggressive approach to borders, cities, and just projecting American strength. Now, on immigration, the president painted a picture of success, pointing out that illegal border crossings are at a 55-year low. But he also made it clear he's ready to ramp things up, saying that aggressive tactics haven't gone far enough. And this goes all the way to a policy of deporting anyone who entered illegally, whether they have a criminal record or not. The stated goal? To remove an estimated 25 million people.
And this is where the conversation took a really dramatic turn. When he was pushed on how he planned to handle crime in cities, the president brought up the Insurrection Act. Now, this is a rarely used law that would let him send in the military, we're talking the Army, the Marines, onto American streets to enforce domestic laws. And he made a point to emphasize that a judge can't challenge it, which is a huge statement about how he sees the scope of his own authority.
This forceful security posture isn't just a domestic thing either. The interview also confirmed a huge military operation happening in the Caribbean right on Venezuela's doorstep. The official reason is to stop drug smugglers, but the president was clear that it's also a direct shot at the Maduro regime, who he says is emptying its prisons into the U.S. So it definitely adds another layer of geopolitical pressure to the whole mission.
Okay, so this whole theme of taking strong action brings us to our next big topic, the president's use of his executive power. The interview really shone a new light on how he views the Department of Justice and his power to pardon, and it raised a lot of questions about where politics and the law intersect. A big part of this section dug into the recent indictment of former FBI Director James Comey, and the timeline, well, it's pretty striking. The president goes on social media and says Comey is guilty as hell, and literally 5 days later, the Department of Justice hands down an indictment. That kind of speed definitely got people asking questions about political influence. So when he was asked about this directly, the president said he had nothing to do with it. His explanation was that he didn't need to give any orders. He argued that these individuals were so obviously corrupt, in his view, that the honest people at the DOJ would just naturally go after them without any nudge from the White House. This use of presidential power was also front and center in a talk about a really controversial pardon. The president pardoned crypto billionaire CZ. The thing is, CZ's company, Binance, had just been part of a massive deal with the Trump family's own crypto company. So when he was asked about that potential conflict of interest, the president basically distanced himself from it, saying, I don't know who he is, and that his sons handle all that business stuff.
And for the final section,
the interview turned to the global stage. And this is where the president made some of his most surprising and maybe most consequential statements on, well, everything from nuclear weapons to a potential showdown with China.
Okay, one of the absolute bombshells from this interview was the president announcing he'd order the U.S. to resume nuclear weapons testing. He said it's necessary because Russia and China are already doing it in secret. But here's the thing. That directly contradicts what his own nominee to lead Strategic Command recently said under oath, that neither country was conducting those kinds of tests.
The conversation then shifted to one of the trickiest issues in all of U.S. foreign policy, Taiwan. When he was asked point-blank if the U.S. would defend the island from a Chinese invasion, he's stuck to that long-held policy of strategic ambiguity. He wouldn't give a yes or a no, just saying, "I can't give away my secrets." But he did add that he thinks President Xi of China gets where the U.S. stands.
So while things are still tense over Taiwan, the interview did bring some news of a temporary cooling off in the trade war with China. A one-year truce was announced right before the interview. And you can see it's a pretty straightforward swap. The U.S. lowers tariffs, and in return, China gives access to crucial rare earth minerals and starts buying American farm products again. It's a pause for sure, but the big conflict is far from settled.
So from a government shutdown to the brink of a trade war, from talk of deploying troops in American cities to resuming nuclear tests, this interview really wasn't just a conversation. It was a declaration of intent. It laid out a really clear, defiant, and ambitious vision for the next 3 years. The agenda is set, and now the question for the country and for the world isn't just what happens next, but what are the consequences going to be?